Talking Journeys of Belonging to Blackness with your host, India Lorick Wilmot.
Who lived in Brooklyn?
Season 5. Thank you for joining us. Today's guest is Nadege Green. She is a journalist, author, historian, and director of community research and storytelling at the Community Justice Project in Miami, Florida. Nadege is also the founder and lead researcher at Black Miami Dade, an emerging digital platform that resists the erasure of Miami-Dade's Black past. Prior, Nadege worked as a journalist in Miami for over 10 years, investigating how historic and current local government policies and actions impact everyday people, and especially African descendants. Her reporting and writings have appeared across various outlets, including NPR, WLRN News, Marketplace, PRI's The World, Miami Herald, and Harper's Bazaar. And her work often centers topics related to housing inequities, climate justice, gun violence, and other pressing issues that disproportionately impact Black and Brown communities in Southern Florida. In fact, her most recent edited book project and anthology entitled More Than What Happened, An Aftermath of Gun Violence in Miami, grapples with these themes by highlighting the stories of community members. She's the recipient of several awards, fellowships, and residencies, including the Radio Television Digital News Association's Regional Edward R. Murrow Award for News Documentary, Catalyst Miami's Community Catalyst Award, the Ruth Shack Leadership Award, the Florida ACLU's Gene Miller Voice of Freedom Award, the Senior Civic Media Fellowship at USC's Annenberg School of Innovation, the inaugural Community Scholar in Residence at the University of Miami Center for Global Black Studies, and most recently, NYU's Center for Black Visual Culture Distinguished Writer / Community Activist in Residency. We can't wait to learn more from this multi-hyphenate creative who loves history, research, and storytelling as much as I do. Welcome, Nadege.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm sure the audience is interested in learning more about your journey of belonging to Blackness. So are you ready?
Let's go.
Right about now.
Act 1, Call to Adventure.
This is the breakdown.
All right, Nadege. So as a journalist that focuses on community storytelling, local histories, and race, you are afforded the opportunity and also the platform to tell stories and give voice to the issues and concerns of communities, especially those that have been historically marginalized, disenfranchised, and systematically silenced. But let's start at the beginning. What or who inspired you to pursue a career in journalism, in community archiving, justice, and the arts?
I'll start with growing up in Miami, especially around just caring about justice-focused issues. Both of my parents were involved with a Black immigrant rights group here called VAU, which is Haitian Creole for Watch Them. Both of my parents are from Haiti and migrated to Miami in the early 80s. But I think being a young person who would go out with them, my mom would always bring me to the meetings with her. And so at a very young age, I was watching community organizing. I was watching what it looks like to resist unjust policies. I was watching strategy around shifting power within a very local context. Of course, I didn't have any of this language, right? At 7 years old, I was just like, I'm here in this room with all these people and I'm tired. And they would let me design some of the protest signs when they would go out and protest in front of the immigration offices here in Miami. I have my own protest sign. But I think at a very young age that really placed in me the idea that you can make a difference and that you have a voice, because the people that I was seeing were folks like my parents. My mom was a housekeeper. You know, my dad drove the local jitney here. And that is pretty much a van service, the unofficial bus service. You know, it's not the formal Miami-Dade transit, but if you stick your hand out, the van will stop for you and pick you up, right? He drove one of those.
We had one of those in New York. They're called dollar vans.
I feel across the Black diaspora, we have jitneys. They might be called different things, but it is an informal transportation network that will get you to where you gotta go with no AC sometimes, but you're gonna get there. So I was seeing what it looks like to resist. And I was seeing this from the framework of not necessarily people with the most means or the most resources, right? But what does collective action look like when the bus driver and the housekeeper and the farm worker and the woman who clean houses and the mechanic, what happens when they all get together and say that we're going to fight for better for us, right? And so I saw that at a young age. So I definitely think that absolutely helped shape how I view the world and who gets to have a voice, because the people I saw having a voice and making sure that their voices were heard, despite the attempts to silence them, were everyday people. They were people that I could touch and feel and hug. I also grew up in the library system here in Miami. I always shout out Miami-Dade Public Library System. I think librarians and libraries are the most amazing humans and amazing spaces. And they're also very democratic spaces around knowledge dissemination. And my childhood librarian is still my friend today. Her name is Miss Shanita. Still call her Miss Shanita. I will never not put the Miss in front. Like, she's like, you're an adult now. I'm like, you're still Miss Shanita, right? But my childhood librarian, like, she really instilled in me a love of learning, and she encouraged my curiosity. She was a Black woman, also from Miami. She looked like me. She talked like me. This was like the early 90s. I remember more than anything, I thought she was a fashion icon and a style icon. I remember thinking, like, when I grow up, I want to look like Miss Shanita. She always had like the Janet Jackson blonde braids. She had the long acrylic nails. She was just everything to me. When I saw her, I just saw so much beauty and Blackness. And this was the person who was also like pointing me to Maya Angelou, like, hey, have you read this book yet? We went from Clifford the Big Red Dog, early reading, to middle school reading. And I got to grow in her library and to be seen by a Black librarian and to be encouraged to learn and to lose yourself in books, I think was one of the best gifts I ever could have received. And so I think that absolutely shaped, you know, my love of just learning and finding out more information. And if the information wasn't here, I knew that this isn't the only library. She would be like, well, there's the main library. We can also send books for you and we can put in requests. So I always knew that the information that I was seeking, if it existed, I could find it. And so I think that those were two formative things for me. And last, I have to uplift the Black elders in Miami who raised me and who loved on me. You know, Miami is a very interesting space because it is a very Black space and is a very Black diasporic space. So my elders were Black Haitians, they were Black Bahamians, they were Black African-Americans from Mississippi and Georgia and native-born Floridians. And so I had all of these touchstones around Black elders who would share their stories, you know, like my best friend's grandma, Grandma Dot. She's the one who taught me how to make collard greens. We don't make collard greens in the Haitian community like that, right? It's normally prepared more like as a spinach. She taught me her food ways, but in cooking and in breaking bread and eating, I also learned so much more. Right. And she would share her stories. It was folks like my mentor, B. Hines, who was the first ever Black woman reporter hired by the Miami Herald. I think all the elders, I have stories around sharing food with them. I think in sharing food is when they talk the most. And so that is where I got the stories, you know. And B makes a mean sweet potato pie. She would actually share her lunches with me sometimes. She would always share, but she would also share what it was like growing up in Jim Crow, Miami. What the reality is to be the only Black woman in a newsroom in Miami. What stories get to be told, what stories don't get told. Folks like Dr. Dorothy Jenkins Fields, who actually created the Black Archives History and Research Foundation here in South Florida. And it was the first and the only institution still today that was created in the 1970s to preserve Miami's Black history by actually getting physical objects and ephemera to hold on to. And so they are keepers of collections of Black Miami. But they also had a middle school program when I was growing up here in Miami. And so in middle school, I was learning about archiving. I was learning about oral histories. We would go out with our cassette tape recorders that were provided to us and record elders in the community. So I joke, but it's very real that I got like almost a master's level to PhD level history of Miami Black history in middle school, because I was learning these terms. I was learning the importance around preservation and why do we have to preserve stories. And Dr. Fields always shared that when she was looking for information, deeper information around Miami's Black history, even though she was born here, when she went searching for that information, she was told by a white woman that it didn't exist. Of course, she was perplexed. Like, what do you mean it doesn't exist? And the woman made an off-color remark to the effect of, well, maybe those people didn't consider their history important enough to preserve or to tell. That landed. And she was like, well, I will do it then. Since none of these institutions here in Miami sought us worthy enough or didn't care enough to really save this version of the history, we know this history is here. And so she started that work in the 70s, and that work continues still today. But this is someone who I met in middle school, right? And so I think, and she certainly was not an elder when I was in middle school. She's an elder now, and a beloved one. But I think having access to people who lived this history, who knew this history, and who shared this history in the most loving ways, both as celebrations, like, oh, let me tell you about when Overtown was considered the Harlem of the South. And let me tell you about all the celebrities who used to just be here because segregation made it so that they could perform on Miami Beach because those white clubs wanted them as headliners because they were amazing. We're talking about Josephine Baker. We're talking about Cab Calloway, right? So they could perform on Miami Beach, but they couldn't stay there because Miami Beach was a sundown town and it was no blacks allowed, right? And so at night they had to go back across the color line to what today we call in Miami Overtown, what has been referenced historically as Colored Town. And most areas across the country has had an area called Colored Town, right? Which is where the colored folks have to live. But for the people who lived in Overtown, especially during Jim Crow and segregation, they share stories around how the folks on Miami Beach had to pay for a Cab Calloway show, and he would be performing for free 99 in the lobby of the hotel. The neighborhood got to see him for free, right? And so they were lifting all of these celebrities that they would see. They would talk about Black beauty in early Miami, all the beauty shops, the tailors, the trunk shows that would come in. But they also told us the real around racial terrorism in Miami, around folks who were threatened to be lynched for daring to vote, the Klan riding through our historic Black neighborhoods, of burning crosses in Black neighborhoods and neighborhoods that were on the crux. I mean, they were all white, but there was the border that was ish, and they wanted to secure that border. And so that meant the Klan came in to secure that border so that there was no crossing over, these untold territories, these borders, these invisible borders, right? But these are the stories I grew up hearing. And so I was never not aware of the history of this space. And I was aware of the multi-layered history of this space by the grace of Black community love and Black adults who would pour into us and who would tell us the stories. And often, as is the case in many of our communities, we hear the stories, but they're not always necessarily written down. Versions of them are written down, but the interior does not appear in the same way. You don't get the smells and the colors and the vibrancy in the same way. And so you get to really sit with that. And I've always been a listener. I'm not a very talkative person necessarily. So I like to sit down and hear stories and listen. And so I think those are really some of the major touch points of my childhood to young adulthood that shapes the work that I do today.
But why journalism? Or why archiving? Because there are many folks who may be listening who are equally inspired, entrenched in the work, but they've chosen different pathways. What is it about the storytelling aspect that I'm presuming is what drew you to journalism? Or is it something else?
I was a journalist by accident. I didn't think growing up that, I'm going to grow up and be a journalist. But when I look back, other people were either like, you're going to be a journalist or a lawyer. I actually thought I was going to be a professional dancer. And that was my trajectory, a classically trained ballet dancer, but even before training with ballet, learning Haitian folklore and like the movement of my people, and would perform all over Miami as a young person, Haitian folklore dances, and trained with like master Haitian dance teachers here in Miami. Because, anytime we talk about migration and who leaves, artists tend to be among the wave of people who leave when there is repression, because artists also resist. They tell the stories. They tell their stories through poetry, through their writings, through their plays, through their movement, which means that they are constantly under attack. And so Miami saw a very large wave of Haitian artists who came here and set up shop here. And so those are some of the folks I trained with early on. So I thought I was going to be a dancer. I've always been, though, a writer. I have my journals dating back to middle school. And it is very clear that has always been my vehicle around just getting things out. It has always been my therapy. Writing has quite literally kept me alive, right? Because it is how I best communicate. Instead of saying sorry, I'm the person who would write an I'm sorry letter, as a kid, like, I'm sorry I did this. Will you forgive me? That is how I communicate best, is through writing. But I thought I was going to be a dancer. I trained all through high school. I would go off during the summers, had scholarships with Dance Theater of Harlem and Alvin Ailey up to New York. And I was just like, I'm going to be a dancer. And I majored in dance my freshman year of college. That was not the best experience for me. I went to New World School of the Arts here in Miami. There were just many ways where I just felt like I was being told that this isn't for you. This isn't for your Black body. This isn't for, your neurodivergent self. This isn't for your anxious self. There were a lot of ways that I did not feel supported in that space. And so I left. And when I left, I moved to New York, like all artists do, right? Because you have to find yourself, and you go to New York to find yourself. And what I found in New York was that though I love dance, I didn't love it enough to suffer for it. I didn't love it enough to have 6 roommates. I was good at it. And if I pushed myself, I could make it, but I didn't really want to. And I think that's a good realization to have early on. But I've always been writing. Again, like all throughout this, I remember I used to tell my dance teachers that I'm going to be a dance critic. I want to write about dance. I was really obsessed with Catherine Dunham and that Black dance anthropology in particular. And so I was like, ooh, maybe there's a way to combine these things that I love, dance and writing and history and anthropology. And I went to CCNY, City College, New York, while I was living in New York, and took some anthropology courses that I absolutely fell in love with. And had I stayed in New York, I probably would have majored in anthropology, because I was like, this is it. My mom got sick while I was in New York, and like all good daughters, I moved back home. And I ended up finishing my college career here in Miami. I don't think I thought very deeply about my major. I was just like, well, I'm good at writing. I'll major in English. Because at this point, my mom was like, please have a degree. Please do something. Graduate with a degree, because you hopping around, you leaving people's schools. I was stressing her out a little bit. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to be an English major. And that's what I did. But while I was at my college, I went to Barry University, which is a small private Catholic university here. I had a teacher, Mike Sala, and he was the investigative editor at the Miami Herald at the time. And I always share this story, especially when I go out to colleges, because you just never know who your professors are and also their reach in the world. His class, it was supposed to be Journalism 101. It was not. This was advanced level, and we did not have advanced level journalism skills. But he was like, look, this is what y'all getting. And he gave us literally one assignment. You were either going to pass or fail his class, because that one assignment takes up the whole semester. And he was like, I want you to create an investigative piece about something. You choose the topic. And my topic was very ambitious. I was like, I'm going to make an investigative piece around Haitian gangs in the Northeast corridor of Miami. I've always been a news junkie. I grew up reading the Miami Herald, listening to Haitian radio. Both of my parents didn't speak English growing up, so Haitian radio was an important vehicle around getting information in Creole. And so I grew up listening to that medium. And so I knew at that point in Miami, where like early 2000s, there was a lot happening with Haitian gangs. I knew that I would have access, given I'm Haitian. I know some young people who are in this life who have been affected by what was happening. And I ended up doing a piece about that. When I look back at it, it was not a great piece of journalism, but it was the start of something. And that's what college is about. It's about starting something. It's about really delving into those inkling and bents that we might have. And I got an A in the class. I was the only one who got an A in the class. And Mike Sala was like, have you ever considered journalism? And I'm like, not really. He was like, I think you should. I was like, okay. And he literally walked me into the Miami Herald a few weeks later after the semester was over. We're going into the summer. And I'll never forget because I was working at Bayside, which is not that far from the Miami Herald. I was a hostess at a restaurant, Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, where everything is about the movie Forrest Gump. And he walked me into the Herald and he got me my first job at the Miami Herald as a clerk. And I would answer the phones and, check the emails, generic email that people send stuff to and point it to the right reporters. I was like, okay, I'm a clerk, a part-time clerk at the Herald, and I did my job pretty okay. And a few weeks into my clerkship, Mike stopped by my desk and he went, I didn't bring you here to be a clerk, right? It's like, I brought you here to be a writer, like you are a journalist. He was like, I want you to talk to people. I want you to mingle. And so this is like where the record scratch, right? Because I don't talk to strangers. That's like very anxiety ridden for me. I felt so young in that space, right? Because you're in a room with like people in their 40s and in their 50s, in their 30s even. That was like older for me. I was 22. I didn't come from a traditional journalism background. The Herald is considered like the New York Times of the South. So you had kids from Harvard and Stanford and, University of Florida, people who had already written articles in college and were published, go to the Herald and get internships. And here I am, a homegrown girl. And I felt like I didn't really belong there. I didn't know how to mingle and all that gray stuff that you don't learn unless your parents maybe taught it to you or you were in spaces like that. My parents were working class immigrants who taught me a lot of amazing things, but I didn't know how to like walk up to someone, shake their hand and, invite them out to coffee. Like that's just not something I had ever done before. So I had to like learn that even if I don't know something, I'm really good at figuring it out. And I knew that I'm not really good at initiating conversations first. That's not my strong suit. So what I did was I went to Big Lots or something and bought lots of candy because one thing in the newsroom is people like free food. So I bought lots of candy and I created a candy jar at my desk. And so people would walk by my desk. I don't know if I announced it via email or people just figured it out, but there was a candy jar on my desk and people would stop to get chocolate. But when they stopped, they had to talk to me because like you can't take the people's stuff and not say hi. Right. But that was my way of getting to know folks in the newsroom. And little by little, I started writing blurbs and then that turned into like full articles. And then that turned into, hey, would you like to write for this neighborhood section? But that's really how I got my start in journalism. It was not something that I had even considered as a career. It was a professor who saw that I would be good at this thing. And all of the ways I felt like I didn't belong, then I look back at and I'm like, you're native born here. You know this space. You don't get lost in Miami. You speak 2 languages fluently. I was like, I have the skills for this, and I have language skills and I have all these other things and I have a point of reference for this space. I don't have to like Google this part of it because I have this institutional memory having grown up here that showed up in the work. But that's how I ended up in journalism.
People can see your gifts even before you were able to even realize and actualize them. The mentoring that your professor gave you, basically, he held a mirror up to reflect back to you the things that he saw in you that you innately already had and possessed. Homegrown, multilingual, all the other kinds of hyphenate identities that you already possess just makes you primed to be this person to tell these stories. But if you were to reflect for us, what are the types of stories you choose to tell or present to the public? There's ways of framing stories, amplifying certain kinds of topics and themes. So what are those stories that you're choosing to tell and present? And does it matter in terms of the platform in which you're choosing to tell these stories?
The platform doesn't matter. I think I'm at the point where I dabble in different mediums. I think a story is a story is a story, and it's just a matter of where should it go. I recently did an exhibit early 2023 on Black queer Miami history. So in 2023, this has never been done before. I spent the last 2 years doing oral histories with Black queer folks over the age of 45 years old who are either from Miami or have lived here for at least 10 years. So that came about because I had a friend and I was doing Instagram posts on Black Miami Dade website. We were talking and I think Pride was coming up and he was like, "Oh, are you going to do a series on Pride?" And I was like, duh. I was like, of course I should. So I went digging. And as I dug, the only thing I could find were about really Black queer celebrities who had made their way through Miami, like Moms Mabley, like Josephine Baker, like James Baldwin. And that was all good and great. But I also was like, well, what about the Black queer folks who are from this space, not who have come through the space only, but who have had to live in the space as home? I didn't know what it was going to be, but that became the query. And I think I started a lot of my work with a query, often because I'm like, well, I haven't seen this story before, or I haven't seen this version of this story before, or I want to go deeper still. Like we have some point of reference to the story, but like what happens if we go a little bit deeper? And for me in this one, it was like, why don't we have stories about Black queer Miamians historically in any space that we can find, right? Not through our history institutions, not through our Black institutions. Like you just didn't see it. That is what kicked off that. I didn't know it was going to be an exhibit. I just knew I wanted to capture the stories. But as I was working on that, I was like, oh, it'd be great if we also photograph the people we're talking to and also videos. And once I had all those pieces, I turned to one of my good friends, Marie Vickles, who works at Perez Art Miami Museum. And I was like, what do you think about this as an exhibit? Am I crazy? And she was like, absolutely not. That is absolutely an exhibit. I'm like, so let's make it. So my debut as a curator and developer of a whole exhibit was this year. The feedback was just overwhelming. It was up for just over a month and it drew hundreds of people. The opening night felt like a reunion, one that has never happened before, Black queer Miami in one space, you know? And it was so loving. So I think for me, the medium is open-ended, long as the medium can hold a story. That is how I am approaching this work now. Whereas I think earlier on, I would have been like, of course, medium is writing, traditional writing, and it goes into a traditional media platform. But now I'm like, it can be an article, but it can also be an exhibit. It can also be a short film. It could be a dance. Like there are different ways that this can live. The stories are just centered in Blackness. I'm really interested in the narratives we have not really explored deeply or that have been talked about, but we have not luxuriated in them. Like, what does it mean to stay with something? And I'm also really interested in tenderness around our stories. One of the things I did as a journalist that turned into a book was I covered gun violence as a public health issue in Miami's Black communities. And I covered gun violence in our Black communities the same way we see traditional media cover mass shootings in white communities. And that is with care. You don't see victim blaming there. I think there's a harshness in how gun violence is covered on a neighborhood level. Children live in these apartment buildings that get shot up. The next day, they have to go to school and take tests too. So what does it mean for those kids to have experienced this traumatic event and still have to show up to school the next day? These are questions we ask when there are mass shootings in schools. Mm-hmm. I think these are questions we need to ask when there are shootings that aren't just mass shootings. And I think part of that is because our culture is so used to shootings, right? This horrific thing has become so normalized that it takes an extraordinary event for it to be approached with care. And so if one person is shot, 2 people are shot, 3 people are shot, it's just like, okay, that's normal. But if like 15 people are shot, then it's like, okay, we have to pay attention. And I reject that wholly. Right. Because all of those pieces that we see, right? Like what does mental health look like after? What does it mean to live with this? Like, these are all questions we should be asking on a regular, in particular in neighborhoods that experience gun violence, not as a one-off event, but as a regular thing, right? That this is a constant. And so what does it mean to live in a neighborhood where you have to move your kid's bed from the window preemptively? That is an impact. I did a series around gun violence as a journalist with our local NPR station when I was working there full time. And part of that series was called In Their Own Words, where I would interview community members about the impact of gun violence in their own words and youth as well. And that would be a non-narrated series, which just means that you don't hear me in the interview. You just hear them talking for 4, 5, 6 minutes straight and telling their story. And so as a result of that, after I left the newsroom, I felt like there still needed to be a bringing it together, because I realized that I was archiving the stories around violence, around care, around community care, around gun violence, because we were seeing that in the absence, again, of institutions who see us or want to support us in meaningful ways, the community comes up and stands up for itself. And so there are healing circles and support groups for victims of gun violence in Miami that were created by Black women in order to hold each other after experiencing this tragedy. That all culminated as an anthology. This is the first ever community anthology in Miami about violence, particular gun violence. And we opened it up for submissions. I think the youngest writer is in the 4th grade.
Oh, love that.
We got so many youth submissions, and the adults spoke their excerpts from some of the pieces I did in their own words. But that's another medium, right? And that's a book. And it was a multimedia submission. So maybe you're not a writer, but you're a photographer. We invite you to submit photos. We invited people to submit illustrations. I believe a 5th grader drew a picture of herself at her brother's gravesite who had passed away. And that was her submission. And so I think, like, what happens when you ask the community to tell their stories, not just, you are synthesizing or translating or telling the story on their behalf. But what happens when you literally give them the pen, give them the camera, like, let them tell it, and you just give space for that and show what the community says. I am pretty certain this is the only anthology in Miami's history that is largely written by Black people. There is no other anthology about Miami that is written by community voices that are predominantly Black. I think it was important that the community told this story, even though I had the honor and opportunity to still tell these stories as a journalist. I wanted for there to be space for community to say that this is my story, and to be able to present it how they wanted to present it in the format that they wanted to present it in. And that book is incredibly powerful. So that's another medium that I've looked to. And of course, the digital space through my Instagram account on Black Miami Dade has been another way of telling stories.
I appreciate all that, because in effect, that's the impetus of this podcast too, right? It's just a space, a platform to be able to amplify people's stories, their lived experiences in their own word. I also really believe in the fact that when we are empowered and are expressive, use our voices to tell our own stories, it's a way for us to really embrace and be reminded of our own humanity, as opposed to having others have to recognize our humanity, because they're not always going to do that. And that's evidenced by the fact that we're oftentimes omitted from the narratives and we're silenced in many ways. And if it happens that our stories are talked about, it's from a very particular lens or framework that is not amplifying or edifying in any particular way. And so I appreciate the intentionality in terms of your work, and then also looking to the different platforms and mediums of expression, because we have all the ingredients of our own greatness. It's just that oftentimes we need other kinds of spaces and outlets. And maybe sometimes even for people who are our skin and kinfolk to tell us, you do have permission to tell your story, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to ask it. You can just do it. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I'm curious, in terms of the telling of the stories and working in community and doing this kind of community archiving, what does it mean to do this work as a Black woman?
I think as a Black woman from Miami in particular, doing this work is about really blowing up the myth making of South Florida. There are these maps that show the state of Florida. Everything north of Palm Beach County, like, will be a Confederate flag. And then just south of Palm Beach County to the Keys, you'll see like a collage of Caribbean flags and be like, this is not Florida. This part of Florida is different. Or, Miami isn't Florida. As if to say that this portion is somehow resistant or separate of the legacy and the history of a Confederate state. Because it's not. And so I think as a Black woman and as a truth teller, someone who is rooted in this space and who is rooted in the stories of my elders in this space, it is about honoring their histories and their truths by telling it. Because we can't tell the story about Miami and not talk about the Klan. We can't tell the story about Miami and not talk about the lynchings. We can't tell the story about Miami and not talk about the folks who were chased out of here, the Bahamian pastor who was literally threatened with being tarred and feathered after they actually tarred and feathered the white ally who was working with him. We can't tell the story about Miami and not talk about the Klan parades that used to happen here, or that one of our schools was actually named after Robert E. Lee and was presented with the Confederate flag by the Daughters of the Confederacy. Like, that story is Miami's story. And I think that because Miami is so good at marketing and tourism, that it is really smart at showing you the version of it that it wants you to see. And that is by design. But I think it is a disservice to us as Black folks in this space to erase the history of racial terrorism here that is very much tied into the entire state, because Miami was that. And it's a site of liberation. I think doing this work as a Black woman is really about care. It's about community care and community love. And sometimes it can get heavy, but I also feel that the way I approach the work is not rooted in exploiting our trauma or just binging on the trauma. The trauma is there, and we have to address it. We need to talk about it. If we're going to talk about the terrorism, right, that Black folks have experienced here, then we must talk about the resistance. And those stories of resistance are rich, and they're also here. And so uplifting not just that folks had to fight, but who fought? It was your auntie, it was your uncles. These were everyday folks, you know. Miami was an international space around Black rest, Black resistance. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. would come here to go to the pool and relax, to go back and fight, which is a reminder that we need to lay down somewhere. But he also was working here and pushing folks getting out the vote in Miami with the Southern Leadership Conference. You know, he was also here agitating behind the scenes and working with a Black family who had integrated a white neighborhood, who saw white segregationists come from all parts of the South to protest in front of his home, including carrying signs that says, "We want this N-word moved." And he was a part of that here in Miami. The Congress of Racial Equality, one of their early trainings they did here in Miami around nonviolent resistance, around desegregating the lunch counters. Mine was actually a test place where they practiced these maneuvers before we saw them take it to other parts of the South. So we had young Black and white folks being radicalized around justice in Miami, being trained around these movement fights that we would see across the South that have made textbooks and movies, but you don't see Miami's name there. But Miami was there, and Miami was an important place around Black resistance, one of the first public acts of resistance in the country around public spaces and access to public spaces happened here, around access to the beaches and a wade-in that happened. You know, so you saw nonviolent resistance happening here before you saw a wave happening across the South as well. These are the stories of this space. And so I think being a Black woman from Miami doing this work is really about not being made invisible. You will not erase us, and you will not erase these stories, even though Miami has tried it. But, you know, this work builds on so many other Black historians who are from Miami. And it is part of that story. It is part of that legacy. And I think just being born and raised here, it is love, right? Ultimately, like, this comes from a space of love, and it comes from a space where the community receives the love, but also gives it back. That the community is active participants in telling our stories. People send me videos and photos from their own personal collections, right? Because so many of our museums are in our homes. And you don't have access unless someone gives you access. That's trust.
Right.
Everyone's not going to give you a photo from their album. That's a different level of trust. And so that's, I think, what doing this work as a Black woman is like. And also, I need to lay down too. So it looks like rest. It looks like not doing that thing where you feel like you're not doing enough when you've already done too much. And really, it looks like letting the community hold you too. We are socialized, especially as Black women, to hold a lot, but not necessarily to be held. That is a muscle that is not always strong. In fact, sometimes it's very weak. Across the diaspora, we have different ways we describe it. In Haitian Creole, we have a term called mare sentu, which literally means to tie your waist. And the idea is that when you tie your waist, you can't double over. Even if you feel like you're about to double over, you have to stand tall. So you tie your waist to give yourself that extra support to stand tall. So much of what our predecessors have had to offer us was strength as Black women, right? Like, be strong. But I think increasingly we are learning also that we need to learn how not to be strong. Sometimes you need to double over. You can't just be standing up straight all the time. Sometimes you need to hunch over, and that's okay too. That's a muscle, and that's a muscle that needs to get stronger, certainly for me. That sometimes, you don't have to be strong. Sometimes you don't have to do all the holding. It's okay to be held too, because people have you.
Be what you want to see.
Act 2, The Road. So Nadege, how do you play?
How do I play? Oh, so good. Well, I play with my sons. My 9-year-old is my biggest accountability partner around play because he wants to play. It's funny. I have 2 boys. There's an 18-month difference between the 2 of them. And so I now have an almost preteen. He's 11. He does not want to play as much, but the 9-year-old still wants to play a lot. And he's like, my older brother doesn't want to play with me, so you got to play with me. And I'm like, sir, like, this is not optional. So we play ninja. He loves to conjure things and make up magical worlds. Like yesterday, we actually played pirate. I was Queen Pie. We were at the park and I had to take over one of the slides as my pirate ship. And everything with mom is a history lesson. So I was like, hey, do you know about Black Caesar, the Black pirate who used to be on the coast of Miami's waters? You
always have to infuse teachable moments, even in play. Like, did you know?
Did you know this? I'm like, there was really a Black pirate holding things down here in Miami's waters in the 1800s. Yeah, he makes me play a lot. He plays dress up. He keeps me playful, even when I think I don't want to be. He insists. And so definitely that's how I play. Like, I literally play with a 9-year-old who leads me in play. I also love making things. I'm a crafter. Like, I make earrings and I make bracelets. I call them my love bracelets. My love basket is empty right now, which means it's time for me to play again. But what I do is I make really chunky, fun African print bracelets, and all of the fabric is sourced from a local designer here in Miami. I get all of her scraps and I remake them into bracelets, and I'll fill up like this straw basket in my living room. And anyone who comes to my house knows that that's the love basket. So when you come over, you can leave with a bracelet or 2. People are like, you should sell them. And I'm like, we don't have to monetize and sell everything. I don't want to sell these. These are not for sale. These are special gifts. So that's another way I play. I also love the ocean. Being from Miami, I just feel like we're too close to the water not to be in it. And so I have reignited and promised myself to spend more time in the water.
Do you know how to swim? Because I know a lot of Caribbean people who do not know how to swim.
I am one of those people. I do not know how to swim, but I'm fairly tall. Actually, it is on my to-do list to actually take some swim lessons. And it's funny because people are like, how are you from Miami and you don't know how to swim? And I'm like, it is a failure of our public parks. Like, access to swim lessons are not everywhere. And the places where they were as a kid, I couldn't get to because my parents were working double shifts and adults had to be with you. And if you're at a certain age, adults have to be in the water with you. I didn't have parents who could be in the water with me. And I didn't have parents who could take time off to take me to swim lessons or who could afford swim lessons. If it was down the street and I could walk to it, I probably would have had it, but it wasn't. And so access was limited, even though you're literally surrounded by water. My children can swim. I put them in swimming lessons very early, but now I'm like, I need to learn how to swim because these kids are going to go to the deep end and nanny boo boo, you can't get me. So.
And it's true about the access, because even the legacy of segregation you can see in generations. If you couldn't access the pool because they didn't allow Black people, then where else are you learning to swim? Because it's hard to swim in the ocean because that's constantly moving. You have undercurrents. And so a pool situation is a little bit easier. But if you can't gain access because of your race, then it's hard for you to teach your own children. Therefore, you have generations of Black people who may not be strong swimmers. But I'm glad that we are changing that.
My kids can swim, and hopefully their kids will know how to swim, and their mama will know how to swim in the next 2 years. It is my promise to myself. I just need a private instructor because I can't do it in one of the public pools because I know I'm about to act a fool. I know I'm about to carry on and I'm going to be drowning in 3 feet of water. And so this is just going to have to happen, but maybe not at, the public pool.
I love that. And what about dance? Dance or even your love of food?
I don't dance as much as I should, but I need to get back into a dance practice for sure. I eat my way through Miami. So if food is play, then I play a lot because I love to eat, and I love to eat different types of food. I can tell you where the best street vendors are to get fried conch. In fact, I recently wrote a piece for Gravy Quarterly on how you have to understand conch in Miami is soul food. And to understand that, you have to understand Miami's Bahamian roots, because from its very founding, several of the people who signed our city charter were Bahamian men because Bahamians helped build Miami from its very founding. Not only build Miami, but grow Miami, but literally built the foundation, like to cut down those trees for Miami Beach to be built out, to make the roadways, to build some of the most beautiful structures that still stand today, like the Vizcaya Museum. Black people, and more Black people. So yeah, conch, for example, is like Miami through and through. Conch salad, fried conch, stewed conch, dressed conch. It's like that scene from Forrest Gump with Bubba and the shrimp, but make it conch. I love food. I love to eat. I can cook. Loving to cook is a strong word, but I do love to feed my people. That is a love language passed down from my mom and her mom. We love to see people eat and enjoy the food that we make, or in my case, sometimes buy. But just sharing food together is always a joy. January 1st is Haitian Independence Day. So every January 1st, we make soup jumu, which it translates to pumpkin soup, but really it's a squash. It's like a yellow squash that we make. Some folks call it liberation soup. And the story goes that the enslaved folks in Haiti could not have this soup, but when they overthrew their kidnappers and took themselves back and the country, one of the first things they did was celebrate by making the soup that they were forbidden to drink. And so we make a giant vat of this soup that's probably like 3 feet tall. And I have an open house at my house every January 1st. Folks can come to my house and have soup, especially non-Haitian folks. I don't think we share our traditions enough. Miami is very segregated too. So it's very possible to be from this space and not share in some of the foods or culture that makes this space. And so it is my intentional way of saying, look, everyone should be able to celebrate January 1st as liberation. And across the US, January 1st has always been a day of liberation, right? Like it is watch night. It is a time that's very important around enslavement in the US. It is a time where folks could see their families, right? Across the diaspora, like this is an important date. In Haiti in particular, it's about independence, but I think there is a through line around January 1st, around liberation, around family, around New Year, and what does that mean? I think everyone should start the new year with a thread that starts with liberation. And so like my house is an open house around that on January 1st. If you can get here before the soup is done, you can have a bowl.
That sounds like an open invitation because I really enjoy Haitian food. And every year I have a friend that brings me the soup, liberation soup.
Listen, if you are in Miami, January 1st, 2024, come through.
All right. I received that invitation for sure.
If food is play, then yeah, I play a lot. I love food and I love what happens when we eat together.
Discuss the process of doing the archival work. I know you talked about your recent exhibit earlier in the year that honored Miami's Black LGBTQ plus community in their process of collecting queer stories from the past and the present. But if you can kind of discuss doing that work specifically, the receptivity of the work, how your work and storytelling approach has been impacted by the current political climate. The government's agenda to whitewash and to rewrite or simply omit and silence specifically African descended histories.
Yeah, I think I move with the same spirit so many of the Black folks who have grown up in the South move with, which is we still gonna do it. We're not gonna let government stop us from teaching the truth, right? That is not to say that it's not impactful. The way fascism and authoritarianism works, you create these laws and policies that say something, but it's vague enough that it doesn't say exactly everything. And then people self-censor. And out of fear, people won't even teach the stuff that they are allowed to teach because it becomes all encompassing. It becomes, I don't want to end up losing my license. I don't want to deal with administration and these attacks that we're seeing in the schools. And so I don't downplay at all the horrific effect that these policies are having on our education system, especially as a mom of 2 children in public schools in Florida. I will say, on the ground living in Florida, there is something to be said around, especially schools that are predominantly Black with Black teachers. None of the Black teachers I know are teaching their students that slavery was a choice. But in order for this to work, you need people to uphold this. It will be upheld in some schools, or it'll be just censored out. Books can't be taught anymore. But nevertheless, we resist. We resist these untruths. We resist these lies. And we resist these individuals who will seek to try to wipe out these histories, right? And so resistance in South Florida has looked like folks like Dr. Marvin Dunn, who wrote the book Black Miami in the 20th century. I call it the Encyclopedia of Miami Black History, the first book really that delves into the richness of Miami's Black history. He does a Teach the Truth tour with educators and parents. I am also cognizant that our students have many touch points of learning that do not begin and end at school. And so that looks like after school programs, that looks like summer camps, that looks like freedom schools, which we are seeing popping up again in Florida. It looks like community efforts to bring in some of this learning and teaching into the spaces that kids go to when they leave school. And so these are some of the ways that I'm seeing folks resist on this. It is giving out free books that have been banned, which we have seen happen here. I think from Black Miami Dade, I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing, point blank, period. There's no reason to. This work matters. I'm not scared. And the work is going to continue. And our young folks and young adults who have been engaging with this work continue to do so. But it is disheartening, and it is, quite frankly, insulting to have to tell your children that when you go to school today, if anyone tells you slavery was a choice, that is just flat out not true. And they know that already, but just to underscore it.
Right.
And if someone tells you this, come tell me. I mean, it's always been the case that we have gotten a whitewashed version of history in schools. That didn't just start. This most recent attack that we're seeing also invites these third-party so-called education providers to present children with videos of Frederick Douglass kind of being like slavery was kind of all right. That's not true. It looks like making sure that our kids can speak up. Just yesterday, in fact, our school board had a meeting around just honoring LGBTQ plus month, right? Like that we're going to do the proclamation that would just honor the month. Doesn't affect the curriculum in any way. And it didn't pass for the second year in a row. But before we saw this wave, right, this was just a normal thing. It happened, right? So we're seeing the real impact of that. We're seeing the censorship in real time. We're seeing some of our best teachers leave the classroom because they will not teach lies, and they're not going to censor themselves either. There was an amazing teacher at Miami Norland High School who I love and know, Renee O'Connor, who recently just left the classroom. She's still doing teacher trainings nationally, and she's still doing stuff in the education space. She was like, but I can't compromise who I am as a Black woman. And I'm not going to compromise the education of my students by teaching them lies. That is a real impact, right? That we're losing some of our best teachers and may continue to do so because of what's happening here. But I will say this, a lot of people are saying, like, I'm going to leave Florida. All of us can't leave. And for many of us, this is home that we love. And I don't begrudge the people who leave either, right? I understand safety. And if you have the means to go, why you go. But there will always be people for whom this is home in a way that does not allow for leaving. And for the people who can't leave, who won't leave, and who stay to fight, that those stories are ever present here too. Like, those stories are also very real.
What I'm fearful of, Miami in particular was sort of like the test kitchen for the civil rights efforts and sit-ins. Florida, in many ways, is like a test kitchen for all these other policies that we see popping up in other places in the country. And my concern is that when you have legislation or certain kinds of push around the censorship, or just even the silencing of African descended stories and histories and positive contributions, the problem there is that now you have spaces that you even enjoyed, like the libraries, that are public funded.
Mm-hmm.
Schools that are publicly funded, even some after school programs that are publicly funded. And so even if they're not getting the education in these institutions like schools, I feel like there's going to be this wave. They're going to start attacking the money.
That is happening. And people are also looking at, like, we want to say something, but we won't say something because, we do get funding from the state. Like, that is very real. In my day job, I'm Director of Community Research and Storytelling at Community Justice Project, which is a nonprofit that supports movement organizing across the state of Florida, largely made up of attorneys, researchers, and storytellers. And we currently represent the Black-led organizations that are suing the state around the anti-protest law that was passed and is making its way through the court systems. In fact, there's going to be a hearing coming up in October around that. Currently, there is a stay around the anti-protest law, which is that it can't be enforced. But we saw, again, after 2020 and the so-called racial reckoning that wasn't, that anti-protest laws sprung up in other places. So as Florida goes with the authoritarianism, with the horrific policies that we are seeing, right, it is a test kitchen for what we're seeing. And when people see, okay, like Florida did it, now Texas is doing it, because you see that it works and you perfect upon it. That is absolutely happening here. And I have to shout out organizations like the Dream Defenders, like Miami Workers Center, like Florida Housing Justice Alliance, some of the clergy in Central Florida who are actively working against this, who are actively working on the political front and political education around what's happening in Florida as well. We will do this ourselves as well, and we will hold accountable government, right? We're not saying that you have now passed this and we cool with it and we'll just do it ourselves. No, our kids need to learn the truth in school. We're going to be at these school board meetings. We are going to be active in what is happening here. You can't not be. It is addressing what's happening on a systems level and, on a community level, looking at, like, how do you create what is going to be missing in the interim? Like, two things are happening hand in hand here. And you do have the organizing happening here. You have the political work happening here. But Florida is increasingly a red state, and Miami-Dade used to be a spot where you had blue. But I mean, the right wing has taken hold here too in Miami-Dade. And all of that is true in this space, but still we're here. Does it trigger despair sometimes in folks? Absolutely. Like, who wouldn't be frustrated? Who wouldn't be angry that you are sending your children to school and the schools are just straight up lying to them? Not only are they lying to them, they are told that if you don't lie, you will be punished. If you don't lie, you will lose your job. You will lose your license. You will lose funding. It's horrific. And it is a model that we are seeing replicated across the state, across the country, and outside of this country. This is a test kitchen around how do we uphold white supremacy? How do we uphold this part of things? Because we are so shook that these histories are ever more present and rooted. And so how do we disrupt that? And that's what we're seeing right now in Florida is a disruption of teaching of the truth. It's a disruption around specifically Black and queer histories. And in fact, one of the reasons the exhibit that came together earlier this year came at a perfect time, even though it was not planned around any of the stuff we're seeing right now. It came on the heels of our AP classes around Black history being pulled. And one of the reasons the state pulled it is saying that, well, there's queer theory in here, and queerness has nothing to do with Black history. Now, I, as a Black queer woman, was just like, what?
Oh, but you also can't talk about intersectionality.
So to be a Black immigrant in Miami, right? Because there are so many Black immigrants in Miami, Bahamian, Black Cubans, Black Hondurans, Black Haitians, Black Bahamians. We can't talk about the intersections from the Caribbean context around white supremacy and the US context around white supremacy. They all come together very happily here in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Because whiteness in Miami is not just white American.
Or white presenting Cubans.
I call people what they call themselves. And in Miami, the majority of Cubans in Miami self-identify as white. And then there are the people who are close to white. But all of that means something here. And so if we want to talk about an intersectional lens, Miami is the perfect spot to talk about an intersectional lens around Blackness and close to Black and whiteness and close to white, because Miami has always been a spot that people really struggle with race, nationality, and ethnicity, like struggle real hard. I want to just be like, baby, come on in, let's sit down and talk about it. Because if you look at the history of Miami, Jim Crow era Miami, many of our farm workers, especially in the 50s, were Puerto Rican. White Miami was not quite sure what to do with the schools and Puerto Rican kids. And at one point allowed them to go to school in South Dade where their parents worked. But some of those kids were a little too brown, a little too close to Black, and some were Black. And so there was a push by the white parents to get them out of our public schools because that looked too much like integration to them. And it worked for a bit until the Puerto Rican farm workers were like, well, we're going on strike. If our kids can't go to school, we can't pick the vegetables and fruits that you need to subsist. You're not going to get what you need if our kids can't get an education here. But this is what happens when you're not quite white in Miami. And the closer you are to Black, the more punished you are, even if you yourself don't self-identify as Black. However, there are many benefits if you are white or close to white. The negotiating of race in Miami has always been something that the city has done, that this country has done. Who gets to be white? When do you get to punch the card to enter whiteness? That has always been something that this country has been okay with negotiating to a degree, right? Miami, same story. If you were a white presenting Cuban or a white Cuban or close to white during segregation, you could attend all white schools. That does not mean that you did not experience the horror of being a non-English speaking white person from Cuba or a close to white person. It doesn't mean that your experience in school was delightful, but your access was different. Because if you were a dark-skinned Cuban, you could not even go into those schools. If you were Black born in Miami, you could not touch foot in those schools because your skin color was non-negotiable. These are Miami stories. These stories are complicated, they're nuanced, and people get really funny about them sometimes and don't want to talk about it. Because if you were a white Cuban, you can go through the police force. If you were Black, you weren't even allowed to go through the police force or even reach certain rankings. So what Blackness is in Miami, or what close to Black looks like in Miami, if you cannot pass for white, and if you're not white, your outcome is very different here and has always been that way historically in this space. And Miami has always negotiated around that in some very interesting ways. But these are the intersectional stories that are real to this place around where you're from, where were you born, what does your skin color look like? Are you queer? Are you not? Are you someone with immigration status? Are you without? All of these things, right, determine so many important things in this space that are now like, but we can't talk about it. Right? Not in our schools. We're not supposed to talk about it. Like, I think, we talk about some spaces become majority minority. And what does that look like? Miami is already a so-called majority minority city. So what does justice look like here? What does equality look like here? And just because it's majority minority does not mean non-white.
Right. It's not a utopia because the populace says demographically this is what it is. There's still other kinds of issues, right?
And it remains highly segregated. Like many truths can hold true in one space. And I think Miami is one of those spaces. And I think uplifting those stories are incredibly important. We have to talk about it. We have to see it. We have to visualize it. And we have to be able to access these stories and these narratives. Like we need to be able to have a better understanding around our sense of place and what this place is and who makes up this place within a very Black context.
Get involved.
Act 3, Where We Land. So Nadege, we've reached the point in the show where I ask all of my guests to share any upcoming projects or innovations, lectures, or exhibits where people can find you. There's a website, your social media handle, all the things.
Okay, you can find the work around Black Miami Dade history at www.blackmiamidade.com. Join the newsletter. That's how you keep up with all of the things coming up and events. So Instagram at Black Miami Dade, where you find daily snapshots of Miami's Black history through photos. So you can get snapshots of Black Miami Dade's personal collection, in addition to collections that are pulled from different places. Oh, you can also reach out via email if you are just an emailer at blackmiamidade@gmail.com. And coming up, I'm really excited for the new year. I am creating a library of zines, research, and oral histories and existing resources to make publications that are for younger readers, up to adults, of course, but with a target audience of younger readers. And the first set of zines will be stories of Black resistance in Miami's history. We will make more, but the first set of zines will roll out sometime next year in time for the summer. They will be available for free online. You'll find them eventually on blackmiamidade.com under the zines tab, which right now says coming soon. And currently on the website, there are coloring pages on Miami's Black history. I commissioned local Black artists from Miami to make them. The first set are from amazing artist Chris Friday, Black woman illustrator who's killing it, that talk about the founding of Miami to the first Black hospital that was built in Miami after the 1918 flu pandemic. Yeah, I'm really excited around independent publishing and the making of material. If you look at Twitter, knee X or X knee Twitter. And not all of our kids are in the digital space or super users in that way. I don't want to neglect the in-person space, which is so incredibly important for community making and building as well. So creating these physical, tactile things that will engage folks in person, and that also allows for people to engage with the information on their terms, in their own way, in their homes, at school, after school, but you can print it out and have access to it.
I love it all. And we have to stay tuned in terms of the new year with the e-zines. Thank you so much, Nadege Green, for joining us and sharing your journey of belonging to Blackness.
Thank you so much for having me and for having this dope platform to talk about all of the things that we're working on.
The journey isn't over, but this episode is. To catch the latest, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Instagram at JourneysB2B_podcast. Thanks for listening.